Okay, we're back, and we're talking about the president's roles. So one, check out this presidential seal, right? So maybe if you want to take a second and kind of look at all the symbolic kind of nature here. So what do these stars represent in this business and this business? And so we'll talk about this in class, but you can take a look at the president's seal, right? So one, the president has some roles, and he has a lot of them, right? So he has a lot of hats, so kind of a lot of jobs in his one position. And so one, he's the chief of state, he's the chief executive, he's the chief administrator, he's the chief diplomat, commander-in-chief, chief legislator, party chief, chief citizen, economic leader, and judicial leader. So that's what we're going to be talking about here in this recording. And so that's a lot of jobs. And so let's take a look. So one, will a president, all right, be great, right? All presidents want to be pretty good, and a lot of them try to be pretty great. But will your face end up on a monument like this, right? So let's see. For Republicans and Democrats are the same. And so let's check this out. So chief of state means basically the president's the head of the government, right? He kind of represents, so he's the symbol of the nation. That's what I would recommend you write down, all these underlying portions. He reigns and rules, right, as kind of the leader of our country. And he gets to decide, actually, who we currently do not recognize. So we can actually snub nations and ignore them. We'll talk more about that in class, but that's an interesting power to have as the chief of state. And this does change from presidency to presidency. So kind of the symbol that the nation represents through its president can go up and down and change. So we see, right, Bush representing kind of the chief of state by throwing out the first pitch, right, or celebrating, football team and their success. So the president does a lot of kind of meet and greet sort of things. More to the job, probably, he's the chief executive. So his task is to execute the tasks of Congress and to get it done, right? Ultimately, we want a president who's getting the work done. This really depends on his job approval. If a president's really popular, it's probably a lot easier for him to get his job done. And if he is not, then obviously the inverse is true. So chief executives, right, do all kinds of things like sign laws, but they also pardon turkeys every Thanksgiving. A little close for comfort there in Turkey land. The president's also the chief administrator, and what this means is the president's in charge of a lot of people, not all people in the government, but a large percentage of them. We're talking 2.7 million civilians, right? And that's about $2 trillion a year. So these are most of the departments, although the Department of Defense is missing on here. I'm sorry, not Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security. But these are the 14, although there's actually 15 with the Department of Homeland Security, departments that are major for the government. Although we'll see there's lots of other departments that are not on this list. Additionally, right, there's lots of numerous federal agencies and commissions, so like NASA isn't on this list, and several other groups that we might get a chance to dive into in class. So we can see, right, this line of presidents. It's an exclusive club. They kind of know what the job is like, and so they actually have some camaraderie, despite being probably political opposites, some of them. It's a lonely job, they say up at the top. So our chief diplomat looks like this, right? He's the main architect for foreign policy. So he gets to decide how we're going to interact with other nations around the world. So he's the spokesperson, right? When he speaks, he represents basically what the nation is going to do. He has a Secretary of State, so this is a cabinet position that kind of works out the president's desires or goals for foreign policy. So we'll see there's Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton was his Secretary of State for quite a long time. And so Hillary Clinton went around the world trying to negotiate with other countries and push U.S. foreign policy around the world. Commander-in-Chief, so the president's in charge of leading the armed forces, right? And he has, with the country, right, 1.4 million people in uniform. right? And the entire arsenal of the military, so all the guns and bombs and everything in between. To run that is in charge of the Secretary of Defense. So this guy talks to the president about kind of military issues. So we can see, once again, I think I showed this picture before, but Obama will go and inspect kind of war movements, right, in Afghanistan or Iraq, and there's Dwight Eisenhower right before D-Day. So presidents take an active role in the military, some more than others. There's also the chief legislator, and so essentially he tries to create public policy, right? And so the president ideally would try to set the agenda for Congress. That often is now getting a little bit more of a dicey situation, but right, the president can insist or suggest or request or sometimes even demand legislation. Sometimes they get their way and sometimes they don't. It kind of is based around their popularity and how many of their party is in Congress and their willingness to go along with what the president wants. But giving the State of the Union is a pretty big deal because the president can speak to the nation and to Congress about what he wants to have happen. And this is an example of checks and balances, right? That even though the president's the chief legislator, he doesn't really write or pass the laws. He can only suggest. So there it is, right? State of the Union, like I said, I think in the last video. I like it. It's a lot of fun outside of the clapping. The clapping gets old. But it's a good idea if you want to see what the president thinks and wants to do, you can always check out the State of the Union. It's always funny to watch the people behind the president, too, and their kind of reactions, whether they're frowning or falling asleep. There's some interesting things that happen behind the president's back. Moving on, the chief of the party. So the president is the leader of the political party, right? So Barack Obama is the leader of the Democrats, and when Bush was in office, he was the leader of Republicans, right? And all of its members. So if the president's successful, people try to ride the coattails, meaning they're going to say, yeah, I like the president, let's do this thing. And if the president's not popular, then they will try to run from the president or kind of ignore him. And so there's some challenges if you are unpopular. You don't have as many friends. So there's the convention. So this is a big, crazy, basically party and the process for nominating a candidate for president. So we can see right down there, I think it was Michelle Obama and this sea of people. So this is a big deal, lots of money. Presents all the people, or that's the idea, right? And that his interest would be the public's interest, right? Rather than private or individual or interest groups, right? And some people would see him as the moral compass of the nation, so that he's supposed to make right decisions, right, and be, morally, on the high path, and votes and follows all the rules. So, right, that he would encourage good civic behavior for the nation by demonstrating that himself. And he's the economic leader, so he monitors and adjusts to try to help the nation's economy. Keep in mind, the president is not in charge, technically, of the economy, nor can he probably make just magic decisions and help the economy become better, but he is a player in it. And so, right, what's the difference between political parties? We'll talk about that with economics. There's lots of departments who are in charge or kind of impact the economy, including commerce, treasury. You can kind of read the list. So examples like if we're going to make a trade deal with Japan, right, then we're going to need that Secretary of Commerce, and that'll impact the economy for good or bad. The president also is the judicial leader, and he enforces the laws of Congress, right? So this is one of the main ideas. So he sets up or helps appoint the judges, right, to federal courts and up to the Supreme Court. And the Attorney General is kind of the chief lawyer and who runs the Department of Justice. So this is kind of like who the FBI is under. And so this is a good, once again, example of checks and balances. The president is in charge of enforcing laws, which gets him pretty close to the judicial branch, but those laws come from Congress, but his job is to make it happen, right? And so we can see, right, people protesting, that they want to protect my health care. And here are all our Supreme Court justices. There's 9 of them. We'll talk more about those guys in the future. And a tough job, right? We can see that presidents age substantially during their time in office. I can remember a pretty young President Bush and definitely a pretty young Barack Obama starting off, and certainly a lot different by the end of their years in service. So guys, that is what we're going to get into. That's Article 2. So we'll get into more details in class about the executive branch. Okay, we're back, and we're talking about the president's roles. The president, there's 9 of them. We'll talk more about those guys in the future. And tough